Hello and Assalamu alaikum everyone. My name is Fiza and today we are bringing to you a very special interview with Dr. Faisal Bari. Before we start off with the interview, I would like to tell everyone that Dr. Bari is the Dean of the LUMS School of Education. So starting off, Dr. Bari, it has been a long week, so how are you doing?
Very well, thank you. It has indeed been a long week. Looking forward to the weekend now.
Same here. All right. So talking about the School of Education, could you give people a little bit of an overview about what the school is doing?
So the school started 3.5 years ago. We have the basic purpose for the school was that everyone felt that there is a lot that needs to be done in the education sector. So LUMS has always opened schools on the basis of where we have felt there is a national need and we need to do something in it. That's how we started with the business school, the first school, the School of Sciences, and so on. And this is the newest and the smallest school, the School of Education, 3.5 years old. It was started because we felt that education as a sector needs input, if we can provide any, for reform, for change, and a lot of other things. It's a huge sector, as you know. I mean, we commonly talk about the fact that 22 million children are out of school from 5 to 6, between 5 and 16-year-olds. There is, even those that are in schools, the quality of education is low, and this I'm talking about K to 12 at the moment. At university level, there's a massive explosion in number of universities. We've gone up to almost 220 or 230 universities across Pakistan. I don't know if you know, there are about 250,000 schools in Pakistan, roughly, plus minus a little. And there are almost 2 million teachers even now when we have a shortage of teachers, right? So we're talking about a massive sector, right? We know that the quality of education is very poor in most of Pakistan. So the idea for the school was, can we collect people together who can think about education, who work on education, who do research, who produce students who can then go out and work on education issues. So that's the thought behind the school. We started, so it's not a teacher training institution. We're not into teacher training. Right. The thought behind that was, we start with something that producing a cadre of people that will actually work on education reform, that will think about change, that will in some ways be catalyst for change. And that's why we started with the MPhil program, which is the Education Leadership and Management. Right? Because with these 250,000 schools, somebody needs to manage, somebody needs to think about change, and so on. And so we thought we'd start producing people who are deeply steeped in knowledge of education, but who also think about change and leadership and how to make things better. And that gave us the first MPhil program. And then we added an executive version of that, which is the MPhil Education Leadership and Management executive side. And of course, we have 2-3 minors that we offer at the undergrad level, but in the undergrad, we don't have a major as yet.
Right. All right. So speaking of the MPhil ELM program, what are some strengths of the MPhil ELM and also the Executive ELM MPhil program?
So both of these courses are degrees are very similar. The only difference being that the regular MPhil is a full-time program. The Executive MPhil happens on weekends and alternate. Regular is for any student who has done graduation. The executive one is has been designed for people who are working during the week so that they can study at the weekend. And it requires, for its admission into that program, it requires a work experience of at least 2 years, but not for the regular MPhil. Right. So our graduating students from LUMS, for example, can go into the regular MPhil program, but not the executive one, because that requires a couple of years of experience. What is special? So this is how we wanted these programs to be on the cusp of theory and practice.
Right.
So right from the day that you are admitted in and you come to LUMS to start the journey in September, we actually start taking students into schools. So there's a course called Observing Schools, which takes every Friday or second Friday, students go into a school. It could be government, it could be NGO, for profit, whatever, a school to observe classes, to work with people there, etc. So we want to expose students to the reality of education from day one. There are three streams of courses that we have. One has to do with research methods, and research on education, so that students are well steeped in what happens in education. The second stream has to do with leadership and management, because that's what we want to specialize in for these students. And the third stream has to do with the practice of education. And there we have a fair bit of, for example, I only already mentioned observing schools, but then in the second year, students start what is called the practicum, where they spend one semester preparing for doing the practicum. And the practicum part, which is the last semester of the course, when they are not doing any other course except just the practicum, they are embedded into an organization where they work on a practical problem for that organization. So for example, think of a school, I don't know, any school, Citizens Foundation or Beacon House or whoever, who comes to us and says, look, how do we make our online classes more engaging? So here's a group of 3 or 4 students who will work with them for almost one academic year to work on that problem. And by the end of the graduation time, they'll come up with whatever solution they have, or they will implement the solution and give feedback to the school. So that gives us a combination of very strong theory, both in research and in education, and then practice, which is by embedding them and exposing them to what is happening in schools in Pakistan. I think this combination is a fairly strong one. And then to top it off, the leadership and management stream, that allows them to, as I said, not think about teaching as such. They'll know about teaching and learning because that's the bread and butter of education. But what they will be experts in and think about is schools, school as a unit of interest, and then systems of schools, right? So think about somebody, Punjab has 50,000 schools over 36 districts. So every district has 1,200, 1,500 schools, right? How do you manage such complex organization? And these are complex organizations, right?
For sure.
TCF has 1,500 schools across Pakistan. There's an entire administrative structure above the principal and up to whoever is the head of the organization, right? That entire structure has to be manned, it has to be creative, it has to know what to do in education and so on. So that's what these people will eventually go into. And of course, entrepreneurship. Education, other than maybe motorcycles and mobile phone business, education has been one of the fastest growing sectors in Pakistan, especially since the 80s, and particularly in the 90s and 2000s. The number of schools just exploded and expanded. Now that's happening at the university level also. Even government is saying they'll have a university in each district, and obviously private sector is also coming in, right? So it's a massively expanding sector, and is always short of good people to work in that sector.
Very well said, Dr. Bari. Absolutely true. It's a very massive sector that's growing very quickly. So a lot can be done, a lot of value can be added, especially by alumni through the School of Education. So talking about undergraduate students, we do want them to also have the spirit to want to work in the education sector. So how is, the School of Education perhaps trying to inculcate the idea of that in undergrads at LUMS and otherwise? So
we have 2 or 3 minors in education, and the reason we offered those was exactly that. I think very few people come into LUMS thinking that they will go into the field of education. They want to be computer science majors, management science majors, and economists, and so on and so forth. Those are very popular as majors and so on. But what they don't think about is fields like education. As I said, it's a huge field. So at the undergrad, what we want to do is introduce students to some of the aspects of education. So we have courses like, for example, philosophy of education, critical debates in education.
Right.
We have courses of arts and education. We have courses about ed tech. We have courses about cognition, computers and cognition, and so on. There's a whole range of courses. You can imagine education, because it has to do with learning, actually it goes into all areas of endeavor of learning, right? So you can very easily think about sociology and of education, politics of education, and so on. So every area you can very well bring a combination of education with that area. Now, so that's why the people say that this is a transdisciplinary area, right? So what we want to do through our undergrad courses is give students an introduction of that. And I'm actually, so now we are like 3.5 years into the experience of teaching at even undergrad level. And the results that I'm seeing is that a lot of the times people come in to take a course in education because there's a requirement for a out course or whatever they call.
Yes, there's an out course, yes.
There's a requirement for taking general courses and so on. But once they take a course, तो फिर वो होता है जो गालिब ने कहा था ना, छुट्टी नहीं है काफिर मुंह से लगी हुई, कि once they get a taste of it, then it's very hard to give up. So it's such a feel that it draws you in, because the questions that you're asking about Pakistan and its future are, a lot of it is through education. So let me just give you, देखें, कुछ हो जाए पाकिस्तान में तो लोग फौरन कहते हैं कि जी तालीम का मसला है, राइट? मीनारे पाकिस्तान पे कुछ हो, तालीम में कोई कमी रह गई कि हम एथिक्स नहीं पढ़ा रहे, हम फलाना नहीं कर रहे. अगर ग्रोथ रेट कम होते हैं वो कहते हैं जी ह्यूमन कैपिटल नहीं है हमारा, ठीक है. अगर पॉपुलेशन ज़्यादा हो रही है तो वो कहते हैं कि जी एजुकेशन में, एजुकेशन ज़्यादा होगी तो बच्चे भी कम हो जाएंगे, ठीक है. Anything you can think of, there's a connection to education. It is that important. If it is that important, well, let's study it more, let's find out more about it, and then work on it. That's what we try to do at the undergrad level.
And as always, the LUMS plans on pioneering in this particular field as well, as we've done in so many sectors otherwise also. So, sir, I'm sure students would like to know, who are listening to this and who want to apply to the program, all of this is makes a lot of sense and it's very intriguing. However, once I'm done with the school, what sort of career am I going to have? Because, you know, a lot of times we're driven by career, कि हम ultimately करेंगे क्या. So, if you could also tell us how some former students are faring currently, and also what opportunities lie once you graduate.
So, I think a degree, an MPhil degree in education opens tremendous fields for you. There, I don't think कि कोई restriction ऐसी है. Education में तो काम है. जैसे मैंने कहा, some of our students have gone and become coordinators. They have become in that bureaucracy of education, or administration of education, they have entered at various levels, right? Managing one school, managing many schools, managing the learning side, managing assessment. वो सारे जो एजुकेशन में चीज़ें होती हैं, देखिए ना, फ्रॉम करिकुलम, किताबें, असेसमेंट, पढ़ाना कैसे है, क्या पढ़ाएं, वो सारी चीज़ें कोई ना कोई तो उसे डिसाइड कर रहा है, मैनेज कर रहा है, उसका फीडबैक ले रहा है, फिर आगे डिसाइड हो रहा है कि क्या किस तरह उसको करना है. तो वो सारी जॉब्स तो ओपन हैं ही एजुकेशन. दूसरी साइड इसकी है जो मैंने कहा कि मैनेजमेंट ऑफ एजुकेशन, इन द सेंस कि भाई आपने इसकी फाइनेंसिंग, ये वो बहुत कुछ देखना है, लीडरशिप देखनी है वगैरह. सो कहाँ जा रहे हैं हमारे स्टूडेंट्स? कुछ जो हैं वो स्कूल लेवल पे भी जाते हैं, वो प्रिंसिपल्स भी हैं, वो कई टीचिंग भी करते हैं किसी हद तक. लोगों का ख्याल है कि टीचिंग के रिटर्न्स कम होते हैं, ऐसी कोई बात. अब तो बहुत फ़र्क हो गया ना टीचिंग का, स्पेशली इन द प्राइवेट सेक्टर. फिर कुछ जो हैं वो PhDs करने भी गए हैं और जा रहे हैं, क्योंकि ज़ाहिर है MPhil के बाद देयर इज़ अ रोड टू PhD दैट इज़ ऑल्सो ओपन, वेदर इन एजुकेशन, डेवलपमेंट, अ नंबर ऑफ फील्ड्स. इसके अलावा जो कुछ लोग अपना काम करना शुरू कर देते हैं. दे डू स्टार्टअप्स, दे डू, आई नो सम पीपल डोंट लाइक द वर्ड ऑफ एंटरप्रेन्योरशिप बीइंग ब्रॉट इनटू एजुकेशन, बट देयर इज अ न्यू वर्ड दैट पीपल कॉइन कॉल्ड एजुप्रेन्योरशिप. एंड आई रियली थिंक एजुकेशन इज वन सेक्टर दैट इज राइप फॉर अ लॉट ऑफ एजुप्रेन्योरशिप. स्कूल खोलने तक ही नहीं, ये जो अब एडटेक में सारा कुछ हुआ है, कोविड ने हमें जो दिखा, it has opened up so many possibilities for us.
Absolutely.
What is needed is innovation, people who come with new ideas and can make that space for themselves in the market for ideas. वहाँ पे मुझे लगता है कि हमारी अपनी imagination is the limit that we have imposed on us. So if people can come in and think innovatively, my feeling is that education as a sector is so open and has so many possibilities of making a good, meaningful life. Look, मैं ये नहीं देखें आप तालीम के शोबे में आके आप बिल गेट्स नहीं बन जाते, यानी ये नहीं कहते मेरे पास $60 बिलियन हो गए हैं या पता नहीं 100 बिलियन से ज्यादा अब तो होंगे, आई एम श्योर, ठीक है ना, कि इतने बिलियन वो आप एजुकेशन से नहीं बनाते. एजुकेशन can give you a good life, but more than that can give you a very meaningful life while having a good life.
Absolutely.
Right? So वो meaningfulness जो है ना वो होती है आप जब बाहर दूसरे लोगों के साथ दूसरे लोगों के लिए काम करते हैं और सारे जो है you create a better world than what you got.
Absolutely.
That's what you get from education.
Right. And we always want to strive for that, to leave the world, this world, we're all going to leave it better than how we found it.
I hope so.
So let's hope so. We're all striving for that. All right, having said that, that's a very comprehensive overview of the program. So I just have one last question, sir. Does a student need to have a prior degree in education or in any way to apply for the program?
बिल्कुल भी नहीं.
अच्छा.
So for MPhil, कहीं से भी आपने वो it's a 16 years of education. जो HEC की requirements हैं for graduate admission, वो हैं कि भाई recognized university से आपने bachelor's की हो 16 साल वाली, यानी 2 साल वाली bachelor नहीं, 4 साल वाली bachelor या 2 साल bachelor 2 साल master, अगर पुराना program था, वो 16 साल की terminal degree हो आपके पास, engineering में हो, medicine में हो, किसी चीज में हो, आपका इंटरेस्ट एजुकेशन में हो, तो वी वुड लव टू टॉक टू यू. द रीजन इज, एक और देखें फिजिक्स वाला क्यों आए एजुकेशन में. भाई अगर आप फिजिक्स पढ़ाने में इंटरेस्टेड हैं और फिजिक्स कैसे पढ़ाई जाती है साइंस उसमें इंटरेस्टेड है, तो देन एजुकेशन इज द फील्ड यू हैव टू बी इन.
Absolutely.
राइट. सो think about some of the most famous physicists जिन्होंने बाद में या of popularizers of physics जैसे कार्ल सेगन वगैरह, उनकी टीचिंग मशहूर थी ना. सो अगर तो आपने उस साइड पे आने ना, the teaching of STEM, the thinking about STEM and so on, तो देन वो भी एजुकेशन के राउट से ही होगा. इसी तरह एनी अदर डिग्री, किसी भी डिग्री से आए, the only requirement is having an interest in the field of education, in what goes on in a classroom, in children and how they learn. That's a prereq. इसके अलावा कोई फर्क नहीं पड़ता आप कौन से बैकग्राउंड से आ रहे हैं. एक आखिरी चीज सिर्फ एक जो मैंने पहले भी कहा, डिफरेंस एक है कि हमारी रेगुलर एमफिल में तो ये है, जो एग्जीक्यूटिव एमफिल है उसमें वर्क एक्सपीरियंस चाहिए, पर वो वर्क एक्सपीरियंस जरूरी नहीं है कि तालीम के शोबे से हो. अच्छा. सो इट कैन बी फ्रॉम एनी फील्ड, but you have to have a few years of work experience. I think minimum is 2 years, but if it's more than right now, what we are getting is average of 4-5 years of work experience.
Sahi, theek hai. So I think we're done with all the information that we wanted to get about the program from the Dean of the School of Education. Thank you so much, Dr. Bari, for giving us your time and being on the Radio LUMS platform. We really appreciate it.
Very kind.
And we hope that students will listen to this interview and they'd be inspired to join the School of Education. We want you here. If you've got the drive to be a part of the education sector in Pakistan, we welcome you here at LUMS. Having said that, I would like to remind everyone that's watching that the deadline for the application to the School of Education is the 15th of March. However, you may sit for the GRE, the GMAT and the NTS GAT by the 27th of March. Additionally, I'm sure after this interview you must be having some questions about the program as well. I would encourage all of you to perhaps write in to our particular email ID, which is soeadmissions@lums.edu.pk. I hope everyone listening to this has a lovely day, and we will be bringing to you more informative interviews through the platform of Radio LUMS very soon. Thank you for your time. Allah Hafiz.